And we are here at our March 1st session for the day. And we did have two previous sessions, February 1st and February 15th. If you were not able to make it to those sessions, they're both on our dashboard. We have all of the resources, videos, etc. on the dashboard. And our outcomes for today, or our outcomes for the whole series, first is we really wanted to strengthen the district continuous improvement teams and processes. And we spent a lot of time on that at our first session, and it continues to be an important piece of having a successful continuous improvement process. So we'll always kind of talk through ways to work in those successful team processes. And then our second outcome for the full series is to really build that understanding and fluency around the continuous improvement process and the use of the MICIP platform. And so we'll be doing both of those pieces today. We'll be able to get into MICIP. We'll also talk about those activities that you'll be able to do outside of MICIP to make sure that you're having a successful experience with this. And then finally, emphasize the importance of monitoring and adjusting to actualize continuous improvement. And that is going to be one of our main topics today, is around implementing, monitoring, and adjusting. That's really kind of doing the work of continuous improvement. It's what makes continuous improvement continuous. So today, like I just mentioned, we're going to be talking about the implementing, monitoring, and adjustment. This is, I put here, it's the work of continuous improvement. So all the stuff that we've been doing so far is the planning part of it. And today we get into then what's the work. And we really want to be able to apply those concepts of implementing, monitoring, adjusting to whatever your individual context is. So whatever your district size is, whatever strategies you've selected, however you run your teams, hopefully you'll be able to apply the concepts that we're talking about today. And just as part of quick introductions here, I'm Dave Hunt. I work for the Muskegon Area ISD, and I'm the Continuous Improvement and State and Federal Programs Consultant. And I'm here with my two co-hosts. I'll let them introduce themselves.
Morning, everyone. I'm Hilda Irani, Dearborn Public Schools. I am the recruitment and retention consultant, and I also support our work in continuous improvement. So happy learning today.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Mike Fine from the Ottawa ISD over near Holland. Sorry about my background, and I couldn't make it last time, but I was in the Grand Cayman Islands, and my colleagues picked up the slack for me, but I'm glad we're here and looking forward to another great session.
And I couldn't help but notice that Mike is looking a little tanner this time. So
yes, he has to rub it in a little bit. I love the beach scenery behind you. Hope you had a great trip.
So just a few logistics pieces. All of our work is all available at the dashboard that we showed, and there's a bit.ly link for that. I recommend that you either add that to your drive or bookmark it. That link stays the same. So every time we have a new one of these, we just add that to the same link. And at the end, when we're done with the whole thing, it will turn into just one big dashboard of all the resources that we were able to use this year. Like I mentioned earlier, the recorded content is going to be on the dashboard following each session. I usually am able to get that posted later in the day. So if you're talking to anybody and they said they missed it, or if you want to come back later and review a certain section or whatnot, they'll all be right there on the dashboard. You're welcome to share anything that we talk about today. The series is free. You're welcome to share anything. So you can give people links to the dashboard. You can invite them to the last piece. You don't even need to register, but if you don't, then you can't get sketches. So if you want the sketches, you do have to register. And that's kind of that next bullet here. You don't need to attend all the live sessions live. A lot of people are participating asynchronously, where they're just watching the videos and reviewing the content. But you can only get the sketches if you're here in person. So make sure that you do sign in and sign out. And the link for that is right on our dashboard for the signing in and signing out. It's right here at the very top where it says, please sign in and out. And if you make sure you could do that, it would really make our sketch coordinator happy. I just saw a note from Ben in there. Ben, I'm sorry, I forgot to let you introduce yourself. Ben Borkel from the MDEs here. I'll let Ben introduce himself.
No need really, Dave, but I just wanted to really thank you on behalf of MDE for all the work that the three of you and others are doing in putting this all together. So really appreciate this. Has been a really important part of our professional learning. since the first of the year. So again, just really wanted to thank you for all the efforts that you have put into this.
You got it. And Ben, we all appreciate everything that you've done with the continuous communication, all the different opportunities that you offer, including the users series that you and Hilda put on. I have a link for that in our dashboard. So, all right. Oh, a couple more logistics here. We do use the chat for questions, and you're welcome to post chat questions at any time. Usually we just kind of answer them right in the moment, but sometimes if it looks like something that can wait for kind of a natural stopping point, we'll kind of answer the questions there. Wanted to say that everyone is really welcome to answer questions or give tips, or if something's working for you, put that in chat. If somebody asks a question, you're welcome to answer it too. This is a collaborative time together. It's not necessarily, just us trying to impart the information. We really want to try to crowdsource this and make sure that we're having a community where people can help each other. Along those lines, we do have a resource repository where we can share anything that that you're using. If you have examples or websites that you use, or you've created some documents of your own to help kind of facilitate this whole process, you're more than welcome to add those to the resource repository. And the link for that is highlighted in green right here. And so we have quite a few great things in there that have been added. And if you can continue to build that, that will just help everybody out. So just making some connection to our previous 2 sessions. With the one back all the way to session 1 back on February 1st, we talked about how MICIP's a tool. It can't do the work for you. And we really emphasized the importance of teams and processes that day, and really thinking through and having access to quality whole child data. And that will then allow you to use that data to analyze for root causes and identify not just the challenges that you have, but also the successes. And we talked about appreciative inquiry on that day, and knowing that you don't always have to write about things or make plans around your challenges. A lot of times it can be very insightful to find out what is working well in your district and try to replicate that. And at that first session, we kind of got up through setting up our end targets and interim targets. And from there, we connected that the data that we identified all the way back during the Discover data portion then became our end targets and interim targets. And we'll talk a little bit more about that today. And then at session 2, we really dug into strategies, and we learned that strategies are the specific actions that adults take to achieve the goal. And one of the main things that came out that day, and you'll see on the next couple of slides from the comments from folks on the Jamboard, was that we really want to keep a small number of strategies. You don't want to really pack a bunch of goals and strategies in there. You're not going to be able to do all the work of really digging in and doing the monitoring and adjusting that we're going to be talking about today. So just selecting a nice small number is going to be is really what you want to shoot for there. And that, of course, means that you want to have something that's really high quality and actionable. And we also talked about a lot of different resources that help you pick those really high quality strategies. There's various resources that were in our second collaboration day. And this last piece we're going to talk a little bit more about today. Planning for how to implement that strategy really can't be overlooked. You can't just say, well, we're doing this strategy and then think that it's just going to magically happen. And so we'll talk about that today. These were some pieces right from the Jamboard. So from our participants last time, somebody put less is more, and kind of along that line, someone else put approach strategies from an authenticity rather than taking a technical approach to adding them to the plan. And I think we keep kind of coming back to this, but saying, this is your plan. This is really your, it's here for you. It's not here for anybody else. And so really taking the time to select the right strategies and make sure they're being put into place is very important. And that's what today is all about. And then this person said, the focus is on quality conversations and processes for truly creating change rather than checking boxes to complete our MICIP plan. So same kind of thinking there. So those are some really great takeaways. I'm really glad that people were picking up on that these are our plans and they're here for our improvement. All right, so far we have been making the plan. So I wanted to just kind of get everybody caught up. The feedback has always been that people really appreciate kind of seeing where we are in MICIP and seeing it live in MICIP. So we're going to go ahead and take a minute to kind of catch up to where we are there. So I'm going to open up a window here. And this is the training site for MICIP. And I wanted to just point out that all the instructions for how to get to the training site and then how to log into it are right in our dashboard. I had a couple of comments after our last one that said, hey, can you put the login information for the MICIP training site? And it's all right here. It's just right here on the second page where it says MICIP Sandbox. And so all the instructions about how to log in there into that training site are right there. So I'm going to go ahead and log in. And I'm going to go back to kind of the start and just walk through what we've talked about so far at our series, the last couple of sessions. So the first piece that we do when we go into MICIP is we make a data story. And so we have to select some high quality whole child data to start with. And the thing to remember about this data that we upload now, that these become the things that we look at to make our interim targets and end targets later. So it's really important to put data here that's important to you that you're going to want to set your goal around. And so I made a social emotional data story here. And so I have things in here like the school climate survey that families took, a school climate survey that students took. I have some student risk screening scale data and some portions of the MiFi. And so I uploaded that data, and then below, then you would go through and you would write a data story about that. So you would just say what was initial data story analysis, and then what sorts of things are in place now, what are some of our gaps, and then you summarize your data story here. And so that really is just getting in, looking at the data, understanding the data, and starting to identify where any gaps might be. From there, you go in and you analyze the data. And what we did with this data story was we used the 5 whys to analyze that. There's also the fishbone. And if you want details on that, you can go back and look at our session 1. And it talks about the fishbone and the 5 whys and kind of how to use those together. For this example, I just put in the 5 whys. And it got into some examples that we had used at our previous session. So why do we lack professional learning around how to support social emotional learning needs of our students? And because there's so many competing priorities for our time. And then so we kind of went through the 5 whys, and then we asked why were there competing priorities for time? And we kind of went through that. And finally, we got to this part here where we felt like we hadn't educated all of our staff members and leaders about the connection between SEL and academic performance. And so from there, we made a challenge statement. And our challenge statement was, challenge statements are always come in an if-then statement. And so if staff have a better understanding of students' social emotional learning needs, then we can better engage students and improve outcomes, was the challenge statement that we made. So then we get into defining our goal. And our goal was that we wanted to improve student engagement and social emotional outcomes across all our subgroups as measured by the MiFi and a school climate survey by June of 24. And one of the things that we talked about in our time together in the first session was that a lot of times you can really get the detail about this in your end targets. And so in here, this is kind of the measurable part of that goal, right? So we want to increase the percent of students that strongly or somewhat agree with I like school from 67% to 85% by June of 2024 on the school climate survey. So, so you can really get in here, and your end targets can give you a lot of detail about what it's going to mean to meet your goal. And like I mentioned earlier, these need to be connected to one of your data objects that you uploaded earlier. And so this one is connected to the school climate survey for students, right? So we said we wanted to see them increase what they thought about I like school. And so I tied that right to that data object. And so I could look to see here, oh, where were they before? Oh, okay, so they're at 63%, and that's the one that we really wanted to increase.
Dave, just a quick question in the chat. What was the survey that you used for that information?
So,
Right.
oh, yeah, okay, from Tiffany.
Yes.
So that is the school climate survey, and that actually comes from PBIS apps. They're the people that make Swiss. And Tiffany, if somebody reminds me on break, I'll put in a link to more information about that, or I'll add it to the resource repository. But if somebody could make a note to remind me about that, I'll do that during break. So basically you can set those end targets there, and those end targets, like I said, are going to tie back to those data objects. Our second end target was that we're going to reduce the percent of students reporting that they feel unsafe or very unsafe at school by 6% from the MICIP. And so then I linked out to that data object. I linked out to that specific report from the MICIP. So those are the end targets. That's where you want to be by the end of your goal period. And for this one, we basically set like a 2-year goal. And interim targets are kind of what you can set for shorter amounts of times. And so if we wanted to decrease that by 6%, then we might say, well, let's get to 3% by next year. We also talked about with interim targets that you can add tasks. And so one task that we gave here was we were looking at that data and we said, you know what, I'd really like to understand this data a little bit better. So I'm going to make a task that by the end of October of next school year, we're going to make a student forum to better understand the results of the student climate survey. So we just kind of put a task in here. And then that way we might get some more data from the students that we would then upload. So the next step after we establish our goal and our end targets and interim targets, if any, then we go to select strategies. And this is what we spent our last session on. So again, I'm not going to go into adding them or using the My Strategy Bank and those sorts of things. You can go back and review those in the video. But for this strategy, or for this goal that we set, we decided that we wanted to use the Healthy Student Action Tool and what the Healthy Student Action Tool is. It says right here, it's a suite of online tools designed to help Michigan schools and districts assess the health of their school environments and take action to improve those environments. And so we said, you know what, I think we might like to put the HSAT into place to help us with this goal. This might be one of the strategies that we're going to use for this. And again, like we talked about last time, we used the hexagon tool to decide if this was going to be good for us. And so we thought that this had some pretty good evidence behind it. It seemed usable. There were plenty of supports in place that we could use to put this into place. We needed this. It was a good fit for us. And we were a little lower on the capacity, but that might be something that we could make some activities around. And so we decided that, yes, we're going to put this in our implementation plan. So you can see there's a green check mark next to it that says it's in our implementation plan. And that brings us up to where we are today. So I know that was a little bit of a whirlwind, but that really kind of brings us up to where we are today, which is once we've decided to use a certain strategy, what activities are we going to put into place? And then ultimately, what are we going to do to monitor that? So I'm going to set our demo aside here for a minute, and we're going to talk a little bit about activities, and then we'll come back to the demo and we'll add those activities in. Okay, so there's a couple of things I still want to talk about with strategies, just to kind of get everybody back up to speed on that and think about that a little bit more. And then we'll get into the activities. So last time we were together, we talked about this multiplication problem. And if we want to have socially significant outcomes, that means basically our goals worked. Is what I like to think of as the socially significant outcomes. Then we need to have effective practices. So that means that we're selecting the right strategy. And that's what we talked about in session 2. We need to have an effective implementation. So that means that we put it into place and we monitor that it's working and make adjustments as needed. We're going to talk more about that today. And then we multiply that times the enabling context, which means that we have really solid teams, processes in place. We selected the right data to make our decisions. We talked about that in session 1. So to really be able to get there, to meet our goals, to have those socially significant outcomes, we really need these 3 things. And we talked about last time that this is a multiplication problem, right? We need all 3 of those, because anything times 0 is 0. So you could select the best strategies in the world and have great teams, but if you never actually put those strategies in place, you're not going to have the outcomes. So just a reminder about strategies. Strategies are the specific actions that adults are going to take. So this is what you're going to do, when you're going to do it, what it's going to look like when it happens, and then also starting to think about how are we going to make sure that it's being put into place. And so last time what we talked about with that was that we have things called strategy implementation guides. And we'll look at those here in just a second, because there's going to be a connection between strategy implementation guide and an activity planning tool. So let's get into activities just a little bit, and we'll see how these 2 things connect. So activities are the actions that we're going to take to implement the strategy. And there's really 4, I'll say, phases to this. And the first stage is really getting ready, and when you're installing this piece. And so you can't just jump straight into putting a strategy in place. There's always things that you're going to need to do to get ready to put it into place. And so I'll give an example of that here in just a minute. And then after you've done those activities to get ready for it, then you're going to implement it. So then that's what are we going to do to put this into place? And then the next after that, once you've put it into place, you're going to monitor it. And we start monitoring as soon as we start implementing. You don't want to just monitor things once a year. You really want to get into a good cycle of monitoring, and we'll be talking about that today. And then finally, what are you going to do to evaluate that this strategy is working? So when these 4 different phases here are all really important when you're putting your strategy into place. So let's kind of take a look at the connection between one of the resources that we talked about last time, which was the strategy implementation guide, and a new resource that we're going to show today, the activity planning tool. So I'm going to come over to our dashboard, and right here under strategies and activities, there's 3 things about strategy implementation guide. And basically what the strategy implementation guide looks like is this. And I do have an example that has this filled out that we're going to take a look at here in a second. But essentially what you do is you take whatever strategy you're putting into place and you identify what are the critical components for this. And if you have a well-researched strategy, then it's really going to be what are those critical components that were identified by research. And those will get listed down the side. And then you're going to identify for your context, what's the gold standard? What is it going to look like when we do this just right for each one of those critical components? Sometimes you'll have an acceptable variation where you say, you know, at our elementaries, it's going to look a little bit different than it looked at our secondaries, for example. But what are some acceptable adaptations that you might be able to make to this? Is that acceptable variations? Sometimes there are acceptable variations. Sometimes there's not. You can either do it correctly or you can't do it correctly. And then finally, there's this unacceptable variations. So that's the non-example. This is not what it looks like. And so basically for each of the strategies that you select, you're going to want to fill out this strategy implementation guide. And it's really important to identify for your local context how you're going to put that into place. And when you start to look at this and you see what goes into it, you're going to understand why you want to have a small amount of goals and a small amount of high quality strategies, because this becomes it'll become too much work to do this job and to do it well if you have a whole bunch selected. So let's look at an example of this filled out. So we just talked about the HSAT, and that in our mock goal there, we had selected the HSAT as the strategy that we wanted to put into place. So in doing the HSAT, the critical components that we identified was that we needed to have inclusive building level teams for each building that was participating in the strategy. So if we wanted to put the HSAT into place, we needed an HSAT team at every building. And so what was our gold standard for that? Well, the HSAT team is basically our school leadership team that completes the continuous improvement for the school. And then at a minimum, the team includes the building administrator, a behavioral health representative, a health educator, and a physical educator. So the gold standard for us here was that the continuous improvement team was also the HSAT team. I don't know about all of you, but there's not enough people to go around to make a bazillion different teams. So in this case, we said, the people that are going to be enacting the HSAT is the continuous improvement team. But an acceptable variation might be that there is a separate team, but it still includes those required members. And if we did put that into place, then we need to make sure that there was some good two-way communication between them and the school leadership team. And then an unacceptable variation is that the HSAT is completed by an individual or it's disconnected from a team that's not inclusive. So we didn't want to turn this into a compliance activity, right? We really needed this to be done by an inclusive team. Tiffany asked if the example that's filled out is linked, and yes, it's right here. It's the one that says strategy implementation guide HSAT example. So one of the critical components then was that we had an inclusive team. The next critical component was that the teams completed the HSAT assessment responsibilities. I'm not going to read through all of these, but you can see that there's a gold standard there that the core assessment is completed by the HSAT team at least annually, and it's based on the results. Multiple topic areas of assessment were identified and completed. So that was our gold standard. And then our final critical component was that the teams meet at least quarterly to plan, implement, and monitor the HSAT. And so that's listed there. We made activities from the HSAT are incorporated into our district improvement plan in MICIP. So you can see that if we wanted to make this happen, we really had to identify all of the different components that were going to be in place to do this. So we didn't want just to give the HSAT and then not do anything with it. We didn't want just the PE teacher or something like that to give the HSAT and then just sit on the data. So we really needed teams. We needed to complete the assessment responsibilities, and we wanted to make sure that whatever we agreed on coming out of the HSAT made it into our MICIP plan. So that's just an example of a filled out strategy implementation guide. And the next step in that is that we take that what we used in the strategy implementation guide, and we start to think about what are the activities that we're going to need to put into place to be able to enact what's in that guide. And so let's look at the template first. So you'll see that those 4 phases that I talked about earlier are written across the top. So getting ready, implementation, monitor and adjust, evaluate. And it gives you some really great prompts here across the top about what each one of those means. So if you're not sure what's the difference between implementation and monitoring and adjusting, then it gives you some prompts here. And then it also gives some possible activities that you could put here. And if you're really filling this out and thinking the strategy through all the way, you're going to have some activities in each of these categories. There's going to be some things that we need to do to get ready. There's going to be some things that we need to implement. There's going to be some things we need to do to monitor. And of course, there's going to be some things we need to do to evaluate. And so this tool gives you some options and I guess points in the right direction about what to think through on this. So let's take a look at an example to tie it back to the strategy implementation guide that we just did. So this is our HSAT activity planning tool. And in the getting ready category, we have 2 activities that we want to put into place. The first is that we want to establish all of our quarterly administration level meetings with our ISD health consultant. So remember, our capacity was a little low on this because we weren't sure how to do this. Well, we want to make sure that we have our ISD health consultant to come and help us with this. And so we're going to establish all those meetings in August. So we're going to set up all the meetings and then we'll be set with that for the year. That's one of the things we need to do to get ready to do this. And then our other activity is we want to make sure that we establish all of our building HSAT teams and monthly meeting schedules. So by the end of September, we want to make sure that we have all of our meetings planned out with our building teams and for this activity. And then the other activity was making sure that our ISD health consultant is going to be there with us. So those are the things we need to do to be ready to even do this. And then we get over into the implementation. We're going to make sure that we complete the core assessment. So the core assessment happens once a year, and then you have topic area assessments. And so you can see we complete the core assessment first, and then we complete the topic area assessments. And then we're going to establish what strategies that we're going to do around those two assessments. How are we going to monitor this? We're going to follow the annual HSAT strategy monitoring plan of the 3 critical components. So this is all something that's built into this strategy. They have a monitoring plan built in there, and we're going to make sure that we're using that. And then finally, we get to how are we going to evaluate it? Well, we're going to look at our interim measures in our MICIP portfolio. So remember, we had in there, we had the MiFi data, and we had our school health or our school climate survey. We're going to look at those to make sure that we're moving in the right direction. We're also going to evaluate the fidelity implementation by looking back to make sure we put those pieces into place. And we're going to use the strategy monitoring plan. So, and I think Mike just put in, hopefully this example shows less is more. Mike, you want to talk into that just a little bit?
Sure. Early on from the GM board, it was talking about the less is more category, and to really select something that is essential in your context that you really want to attack and do well at. You cannot have 10 of these. You got to really hone in on what you want. Does that mean the other work does not continue? Absolutely not. But to really go after the essence of something you really want to make a difference is, you have to have less is more and pump your time and effort and resources into what you want to accomplish.
Thanks, Mike. Ben, I wanted to give you an opportunity. Ben and his colleague Lisa Asaro developed these tools several years ago. They've been in place for a long time. And I just wanted to see, Ben, if you had anything to add to this, if you had any tips or tricks or anything else that you thought might be important.
No, I don't think there's really anything that I would add to it, Dave. I just did give Hilda the updated link to this. What we did is to try to align this with the NERN language. We did put an updated version of this on the website that just has installation in the first column, and getting ready is, as you've indicated, is exactly that definition. But I just suggested she might want to swap that one out. But everything that you said is absolutely correct. You don't need to have multiple things in every category, and the less is more is absolutely true. The other thing that we've used this activity for is, if you have a current plan, to go in and maybe map out what your current activities are to see if you have any gaps in your current activities. So a possibility of using it in that way as well.
And that's a really great point. And that actually came up last time. Several folks put in chat and then also put in the feedback that they're going to use some of the tools like the hexagon tool and the planning tools to go back and look at the current strategies. Some people were saying, we have like 6 strategies. And so they're going to try to use these tools to kind of narrow down to what are the most important tools and that are the important strategies, and then how are we going to put those into place. So yeah, you can definitely take these and go back to the ones that are currently there and think through your current strategies. It's not just when you're selecting the strategies. So that's a great point. Thanks, Ben. Okay, I think that is what I wanted to kind of get caught up to. And so I want to show just real quickly back in MICIP, what does it look like to actually do this? And hold on, I need to do a little screen swapping around here. Okay, so I'm just going to briefly go into this, but basically what you do is after you've selected your strategy, so we have our HSAT is here, If you had multiple strategies, they would all be listed. You would just hit the plus sign to expand the one that you want to work on. And for me, usually the strategies kind of align with when my goal is going to be due, but you can put different dates here. Like if you needed to put one strategy in first and then another strategy is going to come after that one's in place, you can adjust the dates on it. Usually what I do is I just put then the strategy and it matches the same parameters as our goal. Then you can say, what buildings do we want this to go for? You can select all of your buildings, or you could select just some individual ones. Maybe this is a strategy that just the elementary schools are putting into place. So I'm just going to say select all. And then from there, you can add your activities. And what I usually like to do is I like to say what phase that is. So is this a getting ready activity or an installation activity? Or is this an implementation activity? And what I usually do is I'll put that right at the beginning of it. And basically all you do at this point is you are taking the items right from your activity planning tool, and you're pasting them into MICIP. So my first one was that we were going to establish quarterly administrative meetings with the ISD consultant. So I'm just going to paste that right in here, and I gave it the label of getting ready. Then you can say who's going to be responsible for this. And again, this will be all how you set it up, who you've put in there. It could be a principal. Maybe you're assigning it to your PE teacher, whoever it might be, but you can assign that to somebody here. I always assign everything to Tom Johnson because I like him. So then you can have like the start date and the due date. Again, it might just be something that is aligns with that. We actually put a date on ours that we said we wanted to be done by August. So I'm going to put that this activity is due in, let's see here, August of 22. So by the end of August, we're going to make sure that we have that set up. And what that'll do is it will let you know when these sorts of things are coming up. So I'm not going to go add all the activities. I'm going to do that during the break. But just so you know, basically what you're doing is you're taking your activity planning tool. You thought through all these things. What are we going to do to get ready? What are we going to do to implement? What are we going to do to monitor and adjust? What are we going to do to evaluate? And you're going to add all those right from your activity planning tool right into MICIP. And then for our purposes today, we're really not going to get into the funding and communication pieces of it, but just know that you can use this to plan out some funding. This does not talk directly to Nexus. So this is just for your own planning purposes. You're not beheld to anything that you put here. So, for right now, I'm just going to put in here that we're just going to spend $1 on it and it's coming out of general fund. But you can use this time to really think through what are all the different things that we have to do to plan for it, what different sources of funding might we need for this. You can really think through all these things at this step, but really it's just for your planning. It's not going to interface with Nexus or anything like that. And then the last thing to think about is how we're going to communicate it. And again, there's some other resources in the practice profile that really kind of walk through this. But we'll just say that we're going to give presentations to our educators about this. So, and I'm going to hold off on adding this plan right this minute because I want to talk about that step a little bit later. But essentially, after you get all of your activities added, when you click Add to MICIP portfolio, that is akin to saying our plan is ready. There's no submit button for MICIP. It's just once it's in the portfolio, that is indicating that your plan is ready for some sort of action. You can still edit it, you can still do a lot of things to it, but once you click add to MICIP portfolio, that's sort of like saying submit, even though it's not submitting to anybody. It's still just your plan. Okay, so I'm going to pause there and just see if there's anything in chat that we need to catch up on. If not, then we're going to transition into the monitoring section.
Ben answered a question that was provided by Dave Vandermeulen, and then we have an additional one that came from Dr. Bland. It is not connected, but will the state request a copy and review it? And I'm going to think that's referring to the funds that you were just checking, Dave.
Okay, sorry, I just saw another comment come in, so I was wondering if it was a clarification on that. So, right, so is the state gonna check it? So, especially when it comes to this piece on the funding, no. All this stuff that kind of happens before we add it to the portfolio is really just about your planning. And so once you hit add to MICIP portfolio, whatever is there kind of becomes something that would be visible to your consultant and those sorts of things. But I would say that these are, we've tried to make the point many times that these are your plans, and it's a place for you to do your planning and to facilitate the process. And it's not so much somebody that's going to come in and go through and look to make sure that everything has been used a specific way. So I guess that's the best answer that I have with that. Ben, would you have anything to add to that?
No, you're right. This is just for planning purposes. The only thing that the consultant will see is what you put into your consolidated application.
So I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but I have specifically heard the consultant say, make sure you are in there doing your the MICIP, and like they've been really pushing it. So the only reason why I asked that, because for some, based on conversations, I think that they believe that whatever we state as a strategy, and if we're using federal dollars, that it needs to be in here. So I don't know where the communication happens with the state and the federal grant consultants, but I don't think that's the messaging that's coming from them. And that's only why I'm asking.
So the strategies and activities for which you need funding should be in your MICIP plan. Those that are in there for maintenance purposes only. So for example, if you have really achieved your goal and you have your funding, say a coach, on an ongoing basis, that can go directly into your consolidated application. Right now, we're in the process of trying to figure out, we can't put maintenance activities or maintenance goals directly from the old Assist platform into MICIP. And so that's something that we're working on.
Okay.
But anything that's, basically the rule is anything that's brand new, that's not been funded before, must go directly through MICIP. Something that's either connected to something that has been funded before and has been approved can go directly into the consolidated application until we can figure out the mechanics, how to move that directly from the Assist platform, the old Assist platform, into maintenance in MICIP. Is that helpful?
It is, thank you.
And we're hoping to have some more details to go over for that in our last session. So for right now, hopefully that'll be enough to kind of get us through here. I'm looking through the other questions that we have here.
There's one from Becky Stauffer. Do you enter your implementation activity plan documents into MICIP? And I'll take a stab at that. If you think that's important evidence for going ahead and completing that strategy, ultimately for goal completion, feel free to upload that as evidence.
Yeah, you can literally upload anything. So we could take those activity planning tools, we could take the strategy implementation guides, we could take those, PDF them and upload them. If you want to have one spot that's kind of the repository for all the information, you definitely can do that. Yep. Questions about how to delete a strategy. Can you take a moment to show the remove from implementation plan? I might have to come back to that one, Sybil, just for time's sake, but if Mike or Hilda, could you write that down to try to come back to that? I don't know we're gonna be able to hit that today, Sybil, but
I got it.
Okay. But if not, then we'll for sure hit it in our last session. And then Lou asked, what precisely does the state review? Will we be covering that? Yes, we'll make sure that we hit that at our last session also, once we get a little bit more direction on specifically what Ben was talking about today. So if Mike, could you maybe jot that one down for us too? Make sure we get that in our planning for next time.
Say that one more time. I was answering a question in the chat.
Yeah, what precisely will the state review? So
Okay.
we'll make sure we cover that in the last session too. Okay, I really want to move on. Thank you for those questions. And I want to move on to the next topic here, which is really the work of continuous improvement. So so far we've been making the plan. And now at this point, we want to talk about that transition from making the plan to doing the plan. And this is when you've added it to your portfolio, and now it's time to actually start enacting your continuous improvement. And so this is our implementing, monitoring, and adjusting specifically, and then to some degree the evaluating piece. We're not going to talk so much about evaluating today, but I'll touch on it real quick. But today mostly we're going to be talking about implementing, monitoring, and adjusting. So this comes out of the MICIP process guide, or MICIP process guide, and it's a really great overview of the whole process, right? So there's basically 3 phases to this whole process. You assess our needs, which is made up of all those pieces up through creating the challenge statement. Then we move into making the plan, which is where we're defining our goals, selecting our strategy, identifying our activities, how we're going to fund it, all the stuff we just talked about, right? That's the plan part. So the last phase then, I guess, to this, if we want to think of it linearly, is this implement, monitor, and adjust. And you'll see that along the bottom, it just says implement, monitor, and adjust over and over and over until it gets to evaluate the goal. And if you were to look at this, you might think that you might be spending equal amounts of time on each of these things, or maybe even you need to be spending more time on assessing your needs because those boxes are larger. And so what I really want to try to convey is that you're going to be spending more time on implementing, monitoring, and adjusting. That is rarely where you're supposed to be spending the bulk of your time. You should be taking a little bit of time to assess your needs. You should be taking some time to make sure that your plan is there. You're going to be continually looking at those things and updating them. But the bulk of our time, we really are going to be doing this implementing, monitoring, and adjusting. So really try to think of that, even though this looks like it's maybe set up and it looks like that they're equal or equal times, really we want most of our time spent implementing, monitoring, and adjusting. And so Mike has an analogy that he would like to make about this.
Yeah, so building on Dave's work, I kind of like, as a building principle, I like concrete examples that I could then transfer into like a continuous improvement cycle. So I just kind of made this up is you go in for your yearly physical, and we call that the assessed needs, and your blood work comes back and it shows, ooh, I have some high cholesterol. So an obvious goal would be is I don't want that trend to continue upward. I want to set a goal of I want to reduce my cholesterol level by blank. So then I build a plan with my doctor. It might have diet and exercise and other components that are built with it. But then you don't go back to the assessed needs or your goal and your plan. What you do is in the monitor and adjusting of that plan about reducing your cholesterol count, as Dave had mentioned, is that's where you spend a majority of your time. And so that monitor and adjust and ultimately the evaluate, which would be, yay, my cholesterol is lower, is majority of our time should be monitoring, adjusting our plan as we go through with the data that we have to support it.
Thank you, Mike. So you can definitely tell where Mike is in his journey through life. He's at the time when he's thinking about his cholesterol.
That's great.
Okay, so let's talk about implementation. So this is my favorite comic strip ever. So I'll give you a second to just kind of digest that. So that miracle that happens in step 2, right? So there's all kinds of stuff happening over here. Then a miracle occurs, and then suddenly the answer presents itself. That's also known as the magic box or the black box. And basically, you have this problem, right? And we select the thing to fix it. So we maybe selected our strategy. And then we selected the strategy. So we felt like, oh, you know what? We addressed whatever that problem was because we selected that strategy. So now our problem should be solved, right? And the problem is that we aren't really unpacking or looking into the magic box here. And so I just was kind of thinking about some things that that maybe come up a lot of times in education. is, you know what, these things aren't working. We need to buy a new program because our kids' reading scores aren't really well. Let's buy a new program. Or let's get a new curriculum. Let's do the curriculum and the process. Let's rewrite our curriculum. You know, we have a lot of behaviors in the building. Let's hire a new behavior specialist. Or let's hire this outside consultant to come in and take a look at things. The perennial one is if we just had more technology, everything would be saved. And then, you know, this teacher is having some problems in this area. Let's go ahead and send them to some PD and maybe that'll help. Right. So like, these are all things that we take this thing and we put it into place, but we don't think through all the detail about what it means to do that well. And really that we started talking about this with our strategy implementation guides. What are those critical components and what's a gold standard for what it's going to look like? And then how are we going to get ready? How are we going to implement and how are we going to monitor that? Those are all the things that you really think about to start to unpack that box. So along with Mike wanted to bring an out of school analogy in, so I'll bring in a few of those too. So there's a lot of other things. This is going to turn into a little self-help maybe, or maybe just for me, but like that we do this in our own lives all the time, right? So it's like, oh, you know, I'm kind of feel like I need to work out more, right? And so it's like, I'm going to work out, but you don't really unpack what that means to be able to do that, or I'm going to get healthy. So the one that I'm really bad at is, you know what, we need to go on a family vacation. And then like, it never really happens because we don't get planned on it. We don't pick the date. We don't decide what we want to do, those sorts of things. So there's these things happen in our own lives, and you can kind of make a lot of those correlations. If you don't really think things through, if you don't actually go through what you need to do to put those into place, then you're not going to have the outcomes that you want. So basically, what it means then to implement is we want to put the plan into effect. And I just have a few thoughts on like what you really need to do to be able to implement something well. And the first is that you really need to agree on what it is. So really being able to define what it is that you're trying to put into place. What practices, processes, and materials you're going to need to do that. If you're going to need professional development on how to use those practices, processes, and materials, agree on how to do it. So how often is it going to happen? To what degree are we going to implement it? And then ensure that we have the time to do it. So is it in your schedule, or does your current schedule allow for it? And then finally, how are you going to monitor and adjust that? And so just as a reminder, our strategy implementation guide is going to help us start to identify those pieces. And then our activity planning tool is going to give us a lot of the detail into that. But those two places are where we really want to identify all of these pieces. That's going to help us define it. It's going to help us decide what practice and processes we need. It's going to help us figure out if we need professional development. It's going to help us agree how to do it, and it's going to help make sure that we have the time to do it. And so those two pieces are just, those two tools are just absolutely essential to actually being able to implement something. And that all comes into planning time. So then we really get into our monitoring. And to me, this is the monitor and adjust is just the most important piece. And this is where we're going to be spending a lot of the time throughout the year as we're putting these things into place. And so monitoring is really that this is when we review the implementation and the impact of what we're doing. And so what I say about monitoring is you need to start monitoring as soon as you start implementing. And something that I see happen quite a bit with people is that they'll select a strategy, they'll go into the implementation. So they'll start, giving the PD, they'll buy their stuff, those sorts of things. And then they don't really think to check to see if it's working or if it's having an impact all the way until the next time it's time to do their continuous improvement plan. So like, this is the assist mentality, right? Oh, it's June again, so I think we should look at the plan and see if it's working. What we're really trying to do is we want to be in continuous improvement. And that means that we're going to be monitoring as we go. And really, the two things that you can monitor for, would be you can monitor for the fidelity, or you can monitor for the impact, or I should say, and you can monitor for impact. And I actually have switched my own lexicon, and I don't talk about fidelity so much anymore as I talk about integrity. So if you were at the Continuous Improvement Conference this year, you heard Dr. Jal Mehta talk about this idea of integrity instead of fidelity, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But basically, it means, did we do it? And so there's a lot of ways that we can really measure if we did something. And one of my favorite ways to do it is through self-monitoring. And it's just really asking people, did you do it? When I was a principal, one of the things that we decided was that we were going to put this specific writing practice into place 3 times a week for 30 minutes. And so all of the grade levels sat down and they said, yep, we're going to do ours on Monday and Wednesday and Friday. Or some people said, let's do ours Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, because a lot of the kids are absent on Mondays and Fridays. So each grade level came up with their own plan for how they were going to put this practice into place 3 times a week for 30 minutes. And so what I did after the first month was I just emailed everybody a survey, and it was just an anonymous survey. And it just said, what's your grade level? Because I had 6 people in a grade level. So that wasn't an identifier for them. So I said, what's your grade level? And then were you able to do this 3 times per week? And then what went well and what was difficult? So what we did then was we just took that data to our next continuous improvement meeting, and we looked at it and we saw that 2 of the grade levels really did a great job and were able to do that 3 times a week. And then 1 of the grade levels struggled with it. And then so we were able to take that and give that to our PLCs to say, everybody talk through this and see what you can do to make an improvement for next time. And then I just did that on a monthly basis. And so monitoring doesn't have to be this like super fancy thing. It's just something that you need to be able to do. And so I'm a huge fan of self-monitoring. I also really like peer monitoring. A lot of this depends just on the climate and culture of your building. But when you can get to the spot where peers are actually doing walkthroughs and able to observe in other people's classrooms and give them feedback, you're at a really amazing spot. Many of us are familiar with the principal or some kind of supervisory positioning monitoring, and those are a little more usually official. Like you might be using, if you're using 5D, you might be using the purpose rubric or the curriculum and pedagogy rubric, but you're able to kind of go around and monitor that way. Another way that you can monitor for fidelity or integrity is artifacts. So you can say, hey, does our schedule allow for this? What do our agendas look like? Do we have writing samples? You can take video of somebody putting something into place. So lots of ways to really monitor for the fidelity or integrity. Lots of ways to kind of check to see, did we do it? The other thing that you monitor for is impact, and that's, did it work? And those are some of our typical things that we might think of when we think of monitoring. And that would be things like looking at student assessment, graduation rates, attendance, those sorts of things. There's lots of other things that you could look at, but a lot of times when we think about monitoring and we're going to look at data, those are the things that come to mind. But that's really, we're monitoring for the impact at that point. We really want to monitor, are we doing it? That comes in that fidelity or integrity piece. So this is just a little bit more on that idea of fidelity of implementation versus the integrity of implementation. That fidelity piece seems to have gotten a little bit of a bad rap, that word. It means to some people, I think, like slavishly adhering to this set of rules, right? And so it's more like you're serving the data instead of the data serving you. And great presentation from Jal Mehta. I'll add that to our link to our dashboard. But basically what he talks about is that you want to take more of a human view of it, that the data is serving the people, and that we want to do things that are consistent to the principle of what we're putting into place, and then making adjustments on what's in front of you to what makes sense. And so just this idea of integrity seems to resonate with people a little bit more than fidelity. So if you're having trouble with this concept of fidelity, or you're having trouble getting buy-in with people, you might want to think about this idea of integrity versus fidelity. But to me, they still get to the same result of, did we do it? So now I would like to unveil. Oh no, I have one more slide before I do. I have something. my favorite thing is on the slide after this. Okay, so so making continuous improvement continuous, right? So if we think about that last line that came out of the process guide, is this idea of implement, monitor, adjust, implement, monitor, adjust, implement, monitor, adjust. So what I want to unpack that one of those squares where it says implement, monitor, and adjust. And to do that, we're going to use Dave's super awesome monitoring and adjusting flowchart, the DSAMAFC. Somebody's got to come up with a better acronym for me.
I'm so glad you copyrighted it.
So it's funny, I went to, I used this in a presentation before, and afterward I got like 5 emails of people saying, hey, can I use that flow chart with my school improvement team? I was like, yes, the copyright is a joke. DSAMAFC is not actually copyrighted. So that's just a joke. Okay, but the concept is not a joke. The concept is really, we're unpacking just one of these little green squares here. And so really you start with saying, did we do it? So back to my example of the writing strategy that we're putting into place 3 times a week. I asked the grade levels, did we do it? And 2 of the grade levels said yes. And so then you could start to get into this, is it working? But we'll go there in a second. So, but one of my grade levels said not yet. And so then we had to figure out, I put this onto the PLC then to figure out, was this an organizational hurdle? Was there something in the way of them being able to do that? And so, for example, did they not have it built into the schedule correctly? Were they the ones that chose, let's do it on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then there were so many kids absent on Mondays and Fridays that they couldn't run it that day? Or there was always assemblies on Fridays, or long weekends around Fridays? You know, was there something that was organizational that got in the way of them being able to do that? If so, then that's usually a technical fix, right? Or it could be a know-how hurdle, right? And so then do we just need to go back to them? And they said, you know, we tried to put it into place and it just didn't seem like it was really working. So we kind of didn't do it. I don't know if that's ever happened to you, but it happened to me all the time when I was a principal. And so then what we would do is you would say, okay, well, do we need some professional learning around that? Do we need some coaching? Do we need to go back to the original reason why we selected this and kind of remember what it is that we need to put into place? And a lot of times those fixes tend to be a little bit more adaptive, right? So the organizational hurdles are usually technical. The know-how hurdles, or sometimes you'll see these as skill or will hurdles. Those tend to be a little bit more adaptive. But basically what you do is you try to work through those. And then you go back like I did the next month. I ask again, hey, were you guys able to do that this month? And hopefully what you see then is that grade level that wasn't able to was be able to make some movement on it and be able to say yes. So a lot of times what you'll get, let's see, Shirley, was it a buy-in hurdle? So this particular case that I'm talking about was an organizational hurdle. Theirs was that they couldn't figure out how to fit it into the schedule, and we were able to make some adjustments to the schedule to make sure that it worked and came out better. But this does work equally well. I mean, the concept of this works equally well if it is a know-how or a skill and will type situation. But in this case, that specific example that I was giving was more of an organizational one. They just kind of couldn't figure out how to fit it in. So basically what you do is you're going to spend a lot of time in this top part, right? And just because my kindergarten and first grade teachers were able to make it work in September, doesn't mean that they were able to make it work in October. And so you need to keep coming back to this until it becomes part of the school culture. And it takes a long time to do those sorts of things. I mean, that's why we're setting these goals and these strategies are multi-year, right? So you need to keep coming back to it and asking, just because they said yes one time doesn't mean that it's solidly in place, right? We were still in more of like an initial implementation phase if you think about the NERN frameworks. So you're going to spend a lot of time up in the top of this. Eventually, you're going to want to start asking, okay, it looks like we're really doing this. We've done this for a while. Is it starting to work for us? And that is when you start to look for monitoring for impact. But a lot of times you need to just do it for a while. And I mean, by a while, it could mean months, it could mean years, that you need to do it for a long time before you're going to start to see your impact. If you set a graduation rate goal, it's going to take years to see the impact of that. If you set a goal of putting a new writing strategy into place, that might just take a few months to put into place, right? So depending on what it is that you're putting in place, depends on how long it takes before you can get to starting to see, are we meeting our targets? And eventually you get to the part where you say, yes, we've met all of our targets. So maybe, again, it might be a couple of years down the line, it might be several months down the line, we met our targets, and that's when you can actually complete the evaluation. So most of the time, though, we won't have gotten to our targets quite yet. And in that case, then you're just back up at the top and you just kind of keep running the cycle. So I want to pause there just for a little check-in, just to say, see if anybody else had an example of this that they might like to share. This is totally unscripted. So like if you had an example where you had to put something like this into place, or that you ran up into a skill and will situation that you had to work through, would really like to just see if somebody has some experience with really trying to monitor something and what they had to do to put that into place. Just want to pause to see if anybody has anything they'd like to share about that. I know we do have 189 participants, so some people might be feeling a little shy to share out. How about while we're thinking about it, in the chat, would we be willing to, if you kind of gave yourself a 1 through 5 kind of scale on, one would be I kind of get this, I'm just getting it, to 5 has been, you know what, I've actually tried something like this and I've been able to put it in place before. Maybe if everybody could just kind of pop a 1 through 5 scale in to see just kind of where we are with this. Okay, getting a lot of 3s and 4s. Looks like our range so far is 2 to 4.5. Oh, I saw 5 pop by. Okay. Good. Okay, thanks to everybody. So if somebody does have an example or anything like that, if you want to pop it in chat, we'll come back to that. But I think I'm going to get into kind of the practical application of this right now. So I'm going to head over to our dashboard, and there's a third step. So far we talked about that we have a strategy implementation guide where we identify the critical components, we figure out what the gold standards are. And then the next step was we figure out what are we going to do to get ready, to implement, to monitor and adjust and evaluate this. And then the last step to kind of close this big loop on all of this is that we are going to use our strategy implementation monitoring plan. So what does that look like? Just gonna zoom in on this a bit.
Once again, keep in mind that everything that Dave is showing, whether it's completed or if it's a blank template, is found on that dashboard that I update periodically in the chat.
Thanks, Mike. So basically what you do for the monitoring plan is you're going to take the what you identified as your critical components, and you're going to paste them right in this critical component, the critical components and gold standards. You're going to paste them right into this document, and then you fill the rest of the document out. So what is the mechanism that we're going to monitor whatever this critical component was? Who's going to do it? So who's monitoring who, right? So in my example, the mechanism for me to monitor if they put that new writing strategy into place was that I gave them a perception survey every month. Who monitors? That was me. I was the principal. Who was being monitored? The teachers. And then so every month And then how are we going to share that? It was shared with the continuous improvement team. And then the continuous improvement team took that back to their PLCs. And then what was our formative assessment? We were looking at student writing samples for that. So in the example that I just shared, that anecdotal example I shared, that's how I would have filled this line out for this guide. So to take a look at our HSAT example, so we're just going to follow our HSAT example that we've been doing, follow that through. So you'll see here that the critical components and the gold standards were pulled straight from here. So I literally just went like this and highlighted and hit copy. And then I came over here and I hit paste, right? So then you have to start thinking through, how are we going to monitor this? So one of the things we said is we're going to have an inclusive building level team. How are we going to monitor that? Well, we're going to have a team roster list that we're going to look at. The curriculum director is going to make sure that the team is all set up and that everybody's on there. We're going to have that done by August 30th of every year. And all of the team rosters are going to be available on a shared drive so that everybody could see who the teams are. Okay. So basically you take this and you just really think through what are all those each individual pieces to put that into place all the way across. So the teams are going to complete the HSAT assessment responsibilities. We're going to use the HSAT data tracking tool. The principal or the team chair is going to be monitoring the team to make sure that that got put into place. And it's the core assessments are going to be done by March 30th. The topic assessments are going to be done by April 30th. And then the results are going to be shared with the continuous improvement team. And then the report outs are going to be put on the district webpage, right? So like, you really just think through what's every step of this. And I hate to belabor this a lot, but this is why you want to have a small amount of strategies. This is why you really want to focus in and not only that, but make sure that this is the most impactful strategy it possibly can be. It all ties together. This is why you want to really do that, that hexagon tool to make sure that this is the strategy that's going to make the most impact for us. So these are all the different things that it all kind of ties together here. So when you're done, you will essentially have a three-part, this three-part piece, right? We have the strategy implementation guide that then feeds into the activity planning tool. And then that strategy implementation guide feeds into our monitoring plan.
Dave, I just want to add one thing. Once again, less is more. And if you look at the completion of these boxes, it is not long drawn out explanations. They're really short and to the point. And that's really what makes the document very user-friendly and readable.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, if you write out a dissertation, nobody's going to read it. So you want to keep everything about tweet links in the common parlance. So the last thing that I really want to show here, and then I'd really want to give time for folks to get into groups to process some of this information, is that you can, there's a document that we can use to actually monitor what we're putting into place. And I have an example of this that I think I'm going to show later. So right now I'm just going to show the template. But basically what you do is you actually just document the monitoring that you're doing with people. So if we, this is our monitoring plan. And this is our monitoring evidence. This is where we actually put the things that we did. So in the example that I gave earlier, I monitored kindergarten, first and second grade on September 30th. The principal monitored, and then I put in here, it looks like kindergarten and first grade, we're able to do our strategy 3 times a week. Second grade was having some difficulties. The PLC is following up, right? So like, again, you just fill this out, and then I would do that again the next month for October. And this really gives you a place to document all this stuff locally. And what we're going to look at, hopefully after the break, if we get a chance today, MICIP now has this capability to enter all this information into MICIP as well. So this is a good place to kind of just keep it all in one spot, but know that there is now a spot in MICIP for this as well. Okay, I did want to touch on evaluation. Then we're going to get into some groups. So I still get a lot of questions about, if you remember back when we were in assist, one of the diagnostics that we had to complete every year was the program evaluation tool. And so I get a lot of questions about, hey, do we still have to do the PET? Do we still have to pick one federal program and do an evaluation of it? You know, all those different sorts of things. And so basically, if you're following what we're talking about today, of selecting a great strategy, making a really good plan about it, and then monitoring that strategy, you're doing what you need to do to evaluate if this is working. And at the very end, there's really only one time that you evaluate, and that's when you end the goal. But if you're following this whole process that we talked about, you're really evaluating along the way if this is working for you, especially if you're going back and making adjustments. So if something isn't working and you go back and you're making adjustments, you're going to easily be able to show that you're doing everything you need to do for evaluation from a continuous improvement process perspective. I wanted to make a note, though, for those of you that run state and federal programs. So I know there's quite a few of you on here right now. This is not going to take care of all the program evaluation portions of a district on-site review. So if you were to have an on-site review and your consultant sat down and said, okay, show me how you're evaluating all programs. And you're like, I use MICIP. You're going to get a change required. So, so basically, you need to be able to show in other ways that you're evaluating all of the ways that you're spending your federal funds. And that's just not being accomplished in MICIP as of right now. So, so there's other ways to do that. If that is an area of interest for people to maybe learn a little bit more about that, give me some feedback, and I could maybe touch on that in a breakout or something like that next time. But just know that if you're somebody that runs state and federal programs, you still need to have other ways to show that you're evaluating all the ways that you're spending your federal funds. And they really want you to be able to show that you're evaluating all of them. And so this process today is really in depth around strategies that you're implementing for your improvement plan. It's not going to be able to show all the ways that you're evaluating every way that you're spending your federal dollars. So, so yes, and I see Bill, I see a couple people chiming in. When you do your feedback at the end of the day, if you would make a note about that, I could pull a little group together. So, okay. So at this point, I'm going to pause the recording and we are going to get into some breakout rooms. So give me just 1 second here.
Council that had each principal was on it, and then they would just bring a teacher volunteer to the meetings, and then we had representation. We had board members, community members, special ed. So in all, it probably had between 20 to 25 people on it. And our primary function was to keep an eye on district data, but more often it functioned as a group that kept an eye on new programs that were coming in and out of the district, new textbooks, new classes, that kind of stuff. So through our work with these changes, and honestly, I got to give 98% of the credit to Dave for our transformation. But he helped me kind of rethink that team. And so the way that it works now is that building principals are still on the team and they bring teacher representation to each meeting. But instead of those just being any teacher who volunteered, now those teacher or teachers are members of the leadership teams at the school level, so that there's that kind of communication and conduit back to the building teams that are also doing the work. And we used to meet about once a month. Not every single month, obviously, like we didn't necessarily always meet in September, December, that kind of thing. And they would only be about an hour after school, kind of depending on what agenda items were out there. And now we're a little bit more strategic. We have, for sure, we have 3 meetings. Next school year, I think when we have a normal start to our school year, we'll have 4 meetings a year where they are a half day in length. And we really kind of dig into the work that's being done in each building. And And so in terms of that work, what we've done is when Dave was kind of going through like what this work and what goal could I put out there that each team could really like, find identity under, I just felt like with all the changes that the district had gone through in the 2020-2021 school year to adjust to everything COVID had thrown at us, that we really needed to get back to, some of those programs that we had started to implement prior to COVID that maybe we, with everything on our plates had kind of let out of our grasp a little bit. And so instead of something new, I said, okay, everybody has to pick something under this idea of implementation. So we've put a lot of time, money, and energy into these lists of things, and buildings could choose from that list as something that they felt that they needed to bolster back in their building as what they were working at the building level. So as an example, some of those items on the list, we had just installed iReady as an instruction or an assessment system in our building right in the middle of COVID. And so at the middle school level, it never really got fully installed. And so they really said, like, we want to do better with, making sure that kids understand why they're taking this assessment. What does the learning pathway mean? How do we use this in an MTSS model? So they chose that they were going to work on the implementation of iReady in an MTSS model. We had recently adopted new textbooks in K-5 in the area of ELA, in 6-12 ELA as well, 9 through 12 mathematics. So any new curricular resource could have been an area that buildings chose to focus in on. The special ed, we had changed our special ed model in middle and high school. That was something that people could choose from. PLCs is something as a district we've been working on for many years, so people could choose from that. So that's kind of where PBIS, we have been installing that. And some of those systems have gotten lax during COVID. So the buildings could choose from this menu that I had given them of different initiatives that we had spent time and money on in the past, so that they could make sure that those were institutionalized at their level. But what was also kind of nice about that is when we are in our instructional council meetings, for the most part, this list that I gave all of them are still things that every building is working on to some degree. And so there's this opportunity in our conversations where even if that wasn't the thing that you had picked for your building, you're still learning from the different ideas and strategies and monitoring tools and such that buildings were installing because they had chosen that as their focus area. So at the district level, that's kind of the work that we've been doing. And now I'll turn it over to Janelle, who can talk about in particular what she's been working at her building at Shetler Elementary.
Hi, so I'm Janelle Duffy, the principal at Shetler, and this is my 6th year here. We, as Allison said, we adopted new ELA curriculum. We have a K-2 curriculum called Super Kids, and then 3 through 5 curriculum, which is My View. And Super Kids, we've had now for about 4 years. My View, we're in our 3rd year. And as we started this process at the end of last year, and we were trying to figure out what we would like to implement, monitor, and we thought that the ELA curriculums would be good because everyone has had a chance to implement it. We've had PD on it, and now we just needed to make sure that we were utilizing all the components that were important. And obviously our end goal is to raise student achievement. So our school improvement team met. I made sure that I had at least one person from each grade level on that team. We also have a parent and an interventionist on the team. We looked at the components for each of the curriculums, so Super Kids and My View, and we came up with the must-dos. Yes, and in those were things that we had to do, and then of course there were some things that we could do if we had time. And then we also went to assessments, and we had to determine which assessments that were going to be done by every teacher. This was great in the fact that if you have a new teacher, you can give them this document and it tells them, you know, all the components that they need to do for our ELA curriculum. So we did that at our leadership team or school improvement team, and then shared that with the entire staff, and just make sure that we weren't missing anything, and had, you know, the staff had good conversations about it. It was in those conversations, you know, some teachers found, you know, like, oh, they didn't even know about that. And so then another staff member was able to show them. And so we feel now that all the staff know those components and are implementing them. And as far as our monitoring piece, through my first 3 observations on each teacher, I would look for the focus areas that they are supposed to implement. And I would just go through and put what each teacher was doing during that time of the components. And so I was able to see quite a bit. And then as far as teachers monitoring, we had teachers choose a classroom to go into and look for the different components of reading. And we did that at a delayed start where teachers all put their times of when they were teaching reading, and then they would cover for each other, or I would go in. And so that every teacher was able to go in and look at reading being implemented in another classroom. And then they just put what component they saw, and then anything that they noticed. And so those are things that we shared out with staff, and now looking at data with this reading implementation, our iReady mid-year scores are looking pretty good. I know I think eight of the teachers are already where they need to be by the end of the year as far as their growth and stuff. So that's pretty impressive. And our plan is that once we get our new math curriculum implemented, that we want to go through the same process with our math. So I think that's it.
So I just wanted to point out a couple of things that you probably picked up on, but Janelle and her team used that strategy implementation guide, and then they used their resource, right? So the curricular resources they had, MyView and Super Kids, had a bunch of different components in it. And if you've ever implemented any kind of curriculum, off the shelf curriculum, there's, you know, this much stuff to implement. And so you have this much time in the day. And so what they did was they identified what were the critical components for them. And then they wrote, what did that look like, right? And so they were able to get really detailed about what would it mean to put this strategy, these curricular resources into place really well. And then they just translated, here were the critical components. Those then became the look fors, right? And so Janelle monitored 2 ways. Remember, we talked about all the different ways that you can monitor. And 2 of the ways that we talked about were principal observations and peer observations. And so at her school, they did both of those items. And so she collected those in pretty much that same format that we looked at earlier, where you just take those critical components, list them across the top, and then she listed her staff down the side, which I cut off on this, and then just put in all the observations. So just a really practical application to everything that we talked about the last 2 sessions that we got together. So thank you, Janelle. Anything else that you want to add about that, Janelle?
I don't think so, except for that the staff were very happy that we did this. Like I said, a new staff member can come in and at least see, okay, these are the things I need to implement. And then, you know, if they're not sure what they are, we can help them out with that. But
awesome. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Lauren, and she can talk about the high school strategy.
Thanks, Dave. So yeah, I'm Lauren Chesney. I've been with the district for 24 years, in administration for 16, and I've been the principal for 11. So I've been here a while. And I guess it would be safe to say the entire time I've been here as a staff member, we have had a very consistent special ed model. And we were approached a few years ago now to start researching a least restrictive environment for our secondary students. So we did that with our middle school and our district team. And in doing all that research, trying to figure out what would be best for Fruitport. So we did some intensive study and COVID got in the way. So this is our first year of full implementation of our special ed model, where we have our students spending the majority of their day in the gen ed setting, and then they are getting their special ed support through our workshop hours in the day. So with that, there was a lot of uneasiness with staff because it was just something different, and in trying to make sure that our special ed students are supported from the special ed end and through our gen ed curriculum. So what we did was, with Allison and Dave's help, is to reform our school leadership team in the building level, and then also stretching that over to instructional council. I've always sat on instructional council, but we are now seem to be just really hyper focused, and I feel like we have the right people on our team from the high school, because they are serving with me on instructional council, and then bringing that back to our school leadership team, so there's a flow. And we know that our main focus at the high school is also, we all are also focusing on PBIS, but mainly the implementation and monitoring of our special ed model to make sure that students, of course, are supported, but also to make sure that our staff members are supported. We have honed in a process this year. We've sent one, and we're planning another survey to send out, surveying our teachers. In our survey, you chose if you were a general ed teacher or a special ed teacher, so we could narrow down those responses, but really asking staff some questions anonymously so they could tell us, like, hey, I don't have any idea how I'm supposed to document this IEP information for their sake and for the sake of the district. How am I supposed to track accommodations? To the other end of the spectrum of staff who are extremely comfortable just trying to create a process that is more streamlined for staff. Especially in keeping track of those accommodations so that we can tell what is being used, what is not being used, and what we might even be able to make as a universal support in the building so that it's taken out of the IEP. We are also looking for staff input on what are our successes in the model, but also what are our challenges? What do we need to work on? And that is brought to our school leadership team to discuss, to throw around ideas. We've been very fortunate to work with Dave a lot this year, and he is helping to guide those conversations so that they are meaningful conversations, with the goal of implementing change at the end of them and bringing it back to staff. And we're using this to determine where to support our staff and our students, so that it's their feedback that we are using to make the changes. We are also then using the information that we gain from the surveys to create some FAQ documents for staff, and keeping those, because our end goal, similar to what Janelle mentioned, is we would like to come up with, it might not be at the end of this year because we're still learning the model, honestly, but we want to come up with eventually an implementation guide that we can use as a staff, that contains all of the big questions that we had, the changes that we made, and where we're going with it, so that we could give it to an incoming staff member, but also it would just be a point of discussion at the beginning of every school year to keep our minds fresh as to where we were and where we're going. In addition to that, our goal is to keep monitoring our model, but also to monitor the student progress and where they are going. So we're really now just starting to get into some data. We're obviously creating a baseline data set this year because it is our first year with the model. And then we will use this year one data to figure out what we're doing well, but also where we're falling short, so that we can use data to determine our next steps in the model. So not sure if there's other information you wanted, Dave, but that's my big spiel.
No, that was perfect, Lauren. And just to mention, so this is where we're capturing all the monitoring and conversations that are happening at the building. And so like Lauren mentioned, that there was this survey that was given, and I popped that up on the screen. And then there was a protocol that the team used to analyze that data. And so this was really, what did they find out of that? And then what was the follow-up? And so they've been able to meet a couple of different times this year to monitor the things that they've been putting in place. And like Lauren mentioned, all of this has been monitoring the implementation. And like she mentioned, now they're starting to think about how are we going to monitor the impact on this. And so they're really thinking about both of those pieces, the implementation and the impact. I just thought that what Lauren shared, much like with Janelle, what she relied on her principal observations and peer observations, and Lauren and her team relied on collecting survey data and doing some self-assessment of it. So there's lots of different ways to monitor. There's not just one way to do it. And the last thing I think that I would say that kind of connects to some of the things we talked about, they both started monitoring right away this year. Like as soon as they got that concept of monitoring and figuring out what those critical components were, they immediately started monitoring it. They didn't wait until the end of the year and say, gosh, how did that go this year? Because that's not continuous improvement, right? The continuous improvement piece is asking yourself continually along the way, how is it going, and making those incremental improvements. And then by the time you get to the end of the year, that's when you can celebrate the kind of growth that you were able to make through the year. So that was just to kind of hopefully tie together some of the concepts that we've been talking about the last 3 sessions. I guess anything else from the Fruitport team that you might want to mention that hasn't been, or a connection that hasn't been made yet?
I don't think so. I think you've summed it up.
I'm good. Thank you.
All right.
Great.
So I don't know if you've been taking a look at the chat, but a lot of people saying that that they like this idea of instructional council, and a lot of people saying that they want to see your documents. So if you don't mind, I'll remove some identifying information and make some publicly facing pieces of some of these. Is that okay, team?
Yep.
Okay,
No
great.
problem.
Is there anything that anybody would like to ask the group before I cut them loose? Just seeing a lot of appreciation in the chat. So, all right. Well, you guys are all welcome to hang around for the last part of our meeting, but I do know that you have other things to head out to as well. So
Yeah.
I can't thank you enough for coming in and sharing some of those real life examples. It's one thing to kind of hear what it's all about and see examples, but to actually see it being put in place in the district was really important. So I appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having us.
All right. So yes, for all of you that have asked if we can get some samples and things like that, I will. I'll get those added into our document probably later today. Okay, so we are doing really well on our time. So what I wanted to do, I do want to go in and I want to show you in MICIP how you can document some of this monitoring. But I want to do something else first. So I'm going to make a slight adjustment to our agenda for the day. So our last session, I want to talk about our last session. And I wanted to give everybody a few minutes right now to take the feedback form, because this feedback form is really important for our last session. We're trying to plan exactly how to set the last session up. We really want to make a really nice differentiated piece for our last session to do some just-in-time pieces that might be important for people, and also give teams time to work if they just wanted that time. And so what we'd like to do is have you give us that feedback now. If I wait until the end, what we're finding is we get less than half of our participants will actually take the feedback survey. So we really want this last session to be about what you need. And so we went back to Mike. I didn't grab that screenshot of the graph, but we went back to your last feedback that said, what are some areas you wanted to spend more time on? And we have created some sessions around those. And so this is giving us a little bit of additional feedback around which ones might you attend, and some other additional feedback. So it'll just take a couple of minutes to take the survey. I'm gonna maybe just put up uh-oh, do I have the wrong one linked? Hold on, I might have linked the wrong one. Let me double check.
It's on page 1
Oh,
as
okay.
you get down towards.
It says, sorry, it says session 2, but this is actually the right one. Hold on, let me just change that. Thanks for asking, Carrie Ann. Okay, so yes, so it is the correct one. It said session 2, but it is actually session 3. Thank you. So if everybody, I'm going to just put 3 minutes up on the timer, and if everybody could just take a few minutes to go through and take that feedback survey, it's linked right here, and I think that Mike put it in chat as well. But if you could take just a few minutes, I'm going to put 3 minutes on the timer.
Dave, I'm going to quick take a snapshot and I'm going to throw that feedback thing in a slide. Dave, I think you're with me. If you go to slide 42, that's the feedback information.
Got it. Thanks.
Yep.
All right, thank you for taking a few minutes. That'll really help us get that last session to be set up exactly the way that you need it. And so this is the screen that I meant to grab and put in here that Mike grabbed for me. As you can see, equity was something that came out real high. This concept of having a round table around small districts and implementing there. The help, I'm brand new, came up a lot anecdotally and in the feedback, and then kind of a combined piece on strategies and monitoring. And so as you saw, those were kind of the breakouts that we're planning to put into place for our last session. And additionally, if your team really just wants that time to work, then you're welcome to do that as well. So we're really just trying to make that to be a time that is set up the way that you need it for your district. And if you, as you saw in the survey, if you felt like you would like some help from an outside facilitator, then we'll be able to pop in and help you out with that too. So anyway, I appreciate everybody taking the time to fill that out. If you didn't get a chance to do that quite yet, if you could make sure you do, we really need that information to make sure we set that last session up to be exactly what you need. So thank you for taking a few minutes to do that. So we have just a couple minutes left, and I wanted to talk about monitoring in MICIP. So this is kind of the nuts and bolts piece, so we talk about process and platform. So we've talked about the monitoring process today, and we got to hear from Fruitport about how they're doing that whole monitoring process. And then on the platform side of things, you can really use the platform to help to document and really guide that process. So in MICIP, there's really in the areas of monitoring for implementation, there's really 3 ways there. And we talked today about that monitoring the implementation for fidelity or integrity, if we wanted to use that word, right? So what progress are we making on implementing the selected strategy as it's intended, and what's the evidence? We talked about that a lot today. There's 2 other ways that you can monitor for implementation that are both available in MICIP. One is to monitor for the scale and reach. And essentially what that is saying is the intended audience really getting reached on this? So you know, maybe you're putting a strategy into place and you're seeing that your everybody number is increasing, but say that your target audience was boys and the boys are still not increasing, then your scale and reach is a little bit off. So it's kind of helping you to look at the detail of that. And then capacity, what progress are we making on supporting the implementation of the goal with sufficient resources? So a lot of that goes back to that getting ready piece, right? Did we set aside money for the professional learning? Did we actually buy the materials that we said we were going to buy, right? So there's a lot of ways that we can monitor that really help us to know, are we implementing this the way that we intended to? And so I'm going to go ahead and get back into MICIP here for a couple minutes. And I'll go to where we left off. Getting the blue spinny circle. Sometimes if you leave it sitting at the screen for a while, it doesn't like it. All right, everybody, are you excited? It's our first technical glitch. I think it's probably more my computer than MICIP. Okay, let's try it. Hey, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to restore our session back to where we were working earlier. So if you remember, this was the screen that we were on, and we had come in here and I had added in one of our activities around getting ready. And so what I did was when we were on break, I went back in and I added all of those activities that were on that HSAT activity planning tool. So if you remember that, so there were some getting ready ones, there were some implementation ones, there were some monitoring, and there were some evaluation. So I have those all added in now. And so basically what I'm doing is when I hit add to MICIP portfolio, that's basically making your plan live. So this is when you click add to MICIP portfolio, you're saying, you know what, we're done with our planning and we're ready to start implementing. So that's what it really means to hit add to MICIP portfolio. And it says, would you really like to do this? Because once it's there, you can come back, and it does point out here, strategies can be edited and removed at any time. So it's not like once you hit this, it's like locked in forever, but it basically makes it live. So I'm going to go ahead and hit add to MICIP portfolio. And if you remember, our goal was to improve social emotional outcomes. Somebody else was in here working today, and that's what this other goal is. But our goal was improve the social emotional outcomes. And the strategy that we selected to do that was the Healthy School Action Tool. And then it lists out all of our activities down below. And you'll see that it only will list 5 activities. If you have more than that, then you have to go to the next page to see the rest of them. So, there's some pages there that you can do. And the main thing that I wanted to show right now is that this is a new feature in MICIP, and I really recommend that you try it out and experiment with it in the training platform before you try to do it with your live goals, because I think you just need to build up the fluency of it a little bit and just see what happens when I do this and what happens when I upload that. I really recommend getting in and trying it out in the training platform before trying it with your live MICIP plan. But once your goal is here, there's a button that's going to say monitor. So I can come in here to monitoring, and for each of your strategies that you have listed, then there will be a monitoring tool. And again, you'd be able to monitor for implementation, and you can monitor for impact. And so if you go to the monitoring tool for implementation, then it's going to give you an opportunity to create notes around each of those 3 implementation areas we talked about: fidelity, scale and reach, and capacity. And so basically what you'd be able to do is you could say, so let's say I'm going to use Janelle's example that she just did, right? She did all those walkthrough datas and all that sort of thing. She could come in here and she could make a note, and she could say, completed our walkthroughs. And then she could go into some detail and provide additional detail about what she wanted to do. Then she could actually, if she wanted to, she could upload that monitoring tool right into the system. And so this works just like the other area where we uploaded data. You could upload things from My School Data. You could upload things from IDEX or Munetrics if you had Munetrics. Or you can upload your own district data. And so obviously Janelle was monitoring on her own monitoring sheet. And so she would have just hit upload district data and she could upload that there. I would also say that you don't have to attach data to it. But you would put in some information here about what you did to check on the fidelity of this. And then you hit create note and it will add it right here. So you can see on March 1st, that we completed our principal walkthroughs, and that was how we were monitoring the implementation of this healthy school action tool. So this is where you can take your monitoring plan, and you can actualize that right into MICIP, right, or your monitoring documentation. So just like what we showed that Janelle had earlier, right? You can take this and you can actually put this stuff, it doesn't have to just live in this document, you can put it right into MICIP. And you don't necessarily even have to retype everything or copy and paste it. You could literally take this plan and you could upload it into MICIP as your update.
Can I add just one point with that, Dave?
Absolutely.
Is what's really nice about uploading it, if you have something into MICIP, is it kind of takes away that notion of institutional knowledge. Let's say that somewhat the building principal had to take a leave of absence in the second half of the year. The team still has access to that, not worrying about the Google link in which that document may reside.
Yep. Thanks, Mike. Okay, so this is pretty new, and especially this piece about being able to add the evidence, that's even newer. The being able to add notes has been there for a little while, I think maybe a couple months now, but then being able to add notes is really new. So I'm just wondering if anybody had any experience with this yet. Have they tried it? Did it work out? If you did, if you wanted to throw that in chat or to throw any questions in chat about that. And I do see, let's see, Melissa said, if we're recording this information on a separate document and then enter it on a later date, can you adjust the date that shows up in the note, or is the date you actually typed it in? Yeah, I believe, Melissa, that it's basically what that's going to do is whatever date you made that note is the date that's going to show up in there. And so if that's a concern in the body of this, you can say monitoring from January to March, for example, if you wanted to do that sort of thing. Yeah, I see Mike said that you could add date to your document that you're uploading as well. But yeah, Melissa, as of right now, that date is not something you can edit. So even if I hit edit right here, there's nothing here that allows me to really change the date on it. Any other questions about this or any experience that anybody's had with it so far? This is pretty new. But I do think that it's a really nice step in the direction of helping us to understand this idea of the continuous improvement, the continuous nature of it, right? We're able to always go in, we're able to always add those types of things. Yeah, Margaret, I agree. You could put the date in the note area. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, so what Ben put is, so like if we came back next month and then we made a new note, then it'll say that it was that one was entered in April. Or, you know, so it'll actually, they build on each other, and you're building out kind of a narrative here about all the work that you did to put this strategy into place. All right, that was the last thing that I wanted to go over today. Looks like we're right on time. So we have just a few minutes left at this time. I welcome everybody to go in and put just a couple of takeaways on the Jamboard. Mike and Hilda and I really look at these Jamboards quite a bit in between. It's kind of like our check for understanding. Did people really understand the outcomes for the day? So if everybody could go in there and just throw something that you took away from today into your Jamboard, they're separated out by last name there. If you could go in there and just throw a statement or two in there, that's really helpful for us for our check for understanding. And again, if you have not yet had an opportunity to finish this feedback, if you could do that before you leave today, we would really appreciate that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and Mike and I will stick around in case there's any other specific questions anybody has.